Okay, good afternoon. Let's start today's Daf Yomi, which is actually Daf Yomi for Shabbos Kodesh, which is Yud, Daf Yud of Bava Metzia, but we're going to start on Tes Amabei. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Shmira for the Chayalim, Hatzala for the Shvuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eighth Tzara. So we're going to start on Tes Amabei around 7 lines from the bottom. And we're actually starting in the middle of a sugya that the Mishnah had said, a case that if a person's riding on an animal and he sees a lost object and he says to the person on the ground, give me that object, and the person picks it up and decides to keep it, then the person who picks it up has acquired it. But if after he gives it to him, he says, oh, actually, I want it back, then he can't do that. So the Gemara then cites a Mishnah from Peah, where somebody picks up the field from the corner of the field, the area that was designated for the poor, the Peah, and he says, this is for a poor man. So under those circumstances, Rabbi Eliezer says he's allowed to, that means he's given it to that poor man. Whereas the Rabbanan say no, he hasn't given it to any specific poor person, and whoever's the first poor person to come around will get it. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, so Ula says that the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan is in the case, where does Rabbi Eliezer say it goes to that poor man? In a case where a wealthy man is giving it to a poor person. Because Rabbi Eliezer is of the position that since he's acquired it for himself, since he can make himself poor, he can thereby also acquire for himself, so he could acquire for his friend. Whereas the Rabbanan don't say that, the two migus. But comes along Rav Nachman, and that's what we're going to start. Amalei Rav Nachman L'ula, V'lema Mar Me'ani La'ani Machokas. So he says, no, that the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan is not just from a wealthy man to a poor man, but even from one poor man to another poor man. The Bava Metzia, and he's going to connect it to our lost object, because a lost object, everybody has a right to it. So it's like the Bava Metzia, Hakol Aniyim Etzla. Everybody's like a poor man with respect to a lost object. And we learned in our Mishnah, V'tinan, Hayarochev Agabe. If somebody's riding on an animal, and while he's riding on the animal, he sees the lost object, and he says to his friend, Tanoi, give it to me. If he picks it up and then he says, I merited it, I acquired it, he's acquired it. So it says, and the Gemara assumes at this point, that this person when he's picking it up, he had intended to pick it up for the man on the horse, and yet he's still saying that the man on the horse has not acquired it. So now, if you want to say that the dispute is between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan is with respect to two poor people, so then we would say the Masnisin on top of Yud Aleph, the Masnisin money, the Mishnah is the Rabbanan who say that you can't acquire it you're not acquiring it for the other person. That even if you see them, that the Rabbanan's position is that when you acquire for one poor person, you haven't acquired for another poor person. But if you want to say that it's from a wealthy man to a poor person, well, if that's the case, then we can understand that. But from one poor man to another poor man, then we're going to say that under those circumstances, from one poor man to another poor man, everybody's saying that you've acquired it for him. Then how is he able to take it back? Our money. Who's the position of our Mishnah? Of Lo Rabbanan, Lo Rabbi Eliezer. The position of our Mishnah does not reflect the position of either Rabbi Eliezer or the Rabbanan in Peah. So that's what Rav Nachman says to Ula. So Amrulay, so Ula says no. Masnisin, our Mishnah is a case where he said Techila. The Mishnah is talking about where this case said before he picked it up, he said, I've acquired it. So that's what he said from the beginning, meaning say from the beginning, he acquired it for his own purposes and not for the purpose on the horse. And in general, we would say that if somebody picks it up for his friend has acquired it, similar to the case of one poor man for another poor man. And so therefore you say our Mishnah is that he never intended to pick it up for the guy on the horse. So that's what we have to say. And indeed, it's logical to say this, that our Mishnah is talking about a case of Techila, that in the beginning he intended to pick it up for himself in the first case. Because, says Ula, the next clause of the Mishnah states, the Katani Seifa, if when he gave it to him, Amar Ani Zachiti Batchila, if when he gave it to him, he said, I have first acquired it, Lo Amar Kum. That's nothing. Why? Why do we need to say this idea in the latter clause? Why do we have to say it? It's obvious that if he didn't say it explicitly, it's like he said nothing, because we say he doesn't have it anymore. You can't just make a claim if you don't have anything in your hands. So why does it say that? So it means So it means to say that. So Gemara says, isn't it obviously the case? Isn't it obviously the case that even so? Isn't it clear that even though he didn't say this was my intent, that was his intent? It must be Hakamashmoan is coming to teach us that the Reisha, that in the first clause, the Amar, that he also said Tchila. And even though he says Tchila in the beginning, even though he says he's picking up for himself, we're going to say that even though he's picking it up for himself, nevertheless, so that's the chiddush of the first case, that he's picking it up for himself, and that's a scenario. The idach, whereas Rav Nachman would say no, tanis seifel aguye reisha. No, the latter cause is coming to demonstrate to us the former cause. Seifa da'amar tchila. The seifa and the second cause is where he says at the outset, "I'm picking it up for you." That was what he claimed. But reisha, but in the first case, the amar tchila, he didn't say he was picking it up for himself, and so therefore. And so he intended to pick it up for the other person. And so nevertheless, he was able to acquire it afterwards, because it's like the Rabbanon, that if he picks it up for his friend has not acquired it. So Rav Nachman, Rav Chisda, Amri Travaya, Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda both say, Bava Metzia Chavero, that if you find an onerous object and you lift it up for your friend, L'Kana Chavero, and your friend has not acquired it. My taima, what's the reasoning? Even though in general we say you can acquire something on behalf of somebody else without their knowledge, but here in this case, you're grabbing something for a creditor, but this person who you're grabbing it from also owes other people money. And somebody who grabs something for a creditor in a circumstance when the person already owes other people money, has not acquired it. So Eisvei Rava or Rav Nachman. So Rava says to Rav Nachman, is that really the case? But is it really the case that if you lift up something for your friend that he has not acquired it, is that really the case? Mitzias Po'alatz. We learned in the Brisa that if, let's say, there's a person who's a hired worker and he finds something and he picks it up for himself, he gets to keep it. When do we say that the Mitzias Po'alatz, one that he gets to keep his lost objects? Bizman Shamar Balabayas Nacheshi Mi Hayom Ador Imi Hayom, where only in a case where the employer says weed for me today or dig for me today, meaning to say he hires him for a specific task, and that specific task does not include the finding of the lost object. Aval Amaro, but if he just says Asay Mi Malacha Hayom, just work for me today, Mitziyaso Shal Balabayasu, then the lost object belongs to the employer. So, and we see from this price that a person would be able to pick it up on behalf of somebody else, because this worker would pick it up if it was just hard to work for the owner for the day. He picks it up, and the owner is acquiring it. So the Gemara says that the Gemara responds. Amalei Rav Nachman says, "Shani Poel." No, the case of a worker is different. Don't bring to me a proof from the case of a worker. The Yado Kiyabalabayastamim, because the worker is very clearly like the hand of the employer. He's just an extension of him. So the Gemara says, is that really the case? Yeah, but how can you say a worker is the extension of the employer when he could just quit in the middle of the day? Gemara says, yeah, that's true. Says, yeah, as long as he doesn't change his mind in the middle of the day, until that point, he's like the extension of the employer. But when he returns, then he's no longer the extension of the owner. So therefore, the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, there must be another reasoning. Now, what's the reason? Meaning to say that the children, that he has the right, that what's the reason why he has the right to go back in the middle of the day? It's not because he's not the hand of the employer, but because there's a basic principle that the children of Israel are slaves to God and not to another person. So you have a worker always has the right to quit. A person who picks up a lost object for his friend is acquired. V'im tomar Mishnah seinu. And if you're going to say, what about the fact from our Mishnah that says that if somebody lifts it up for his friend is not acquire it. So therefore, that case is different. So the Gemara says that the reason why the writer has not acquired it on behalf of the other person is because the Amar Tanoli, because he says, give it to me. He said, give it to me, but he didn't say acquire for me. If he had said acquire it for me, then indeed the writer would have acquired it when the person picked it up. So now we have the next Mishnah. Let's say a person sees the lost object. Let's say it's a Rolex lying on the ground, and he falls on it, and he thinks that that's how he acquires it. But another person comes along. The first guy had just fallen it. The second person comes along and grabs a hold of it. He does a proprietary act on it. The one who grabs a hold of it has acquired it, and not the first person, because falling on an object is not a valid method of acquiring it. Amar Rish Lakish. So it says Rish Lakish in the name of Abba Cohen Bardula, in the name of Abba Cohen Bardula, Arba Amos Adam, Konoslo, Bikol Makom. Arba Amos Shel Adam Konoslo B'Kol Makom. The 4 amos, the 4 cubits around the person, they are going to acquire for him an object that's placed in there wherever he's standing. My taima. What's the reason? Takina Rabbanan the rabbi said if you come with him 4 amos of something, that you acquire it because the rabbis didn't want you to come to a fight. So Amar Abai Mosiv Rabbi Chia bar Yosef Peya. So Abai says that Rabbi Chia bar Yosef challenged this law from Tractate Peah. And Amar Rava Mosiv Rabbi Yaakov bar Ada Nizikin. And Rava says that Rabbi Yaakov bar Ada challenged it from Nizikin. Amar Abai Mosiv Rabbi Chia bar Yosef Peah. He challenged it from the Mishnah in Peah, because what does it say in Peah? Natal, a poor man, Natal Miktas Peah, who took a portion of the corner of the field that was already gathered up, Vizarak al Ashar, and he threw it on the rest of the corner that had not yet been gathered up. Engel Bakum, he has not acquired it. Not the stuff that he gathered up, and not the stuff that he threw it onto. Nafalo, but let's say also if he fell on it that was not gathered up, paras taliso, or he spread his garment over it, mavirin osoemena, we remove him from it. That's not a valid method of acquisition, and we penalize him. V'chein ba'omer, and so too ba'omer shekacha. Also, if there's a measure of stuff that was forgotten in the field. If you say that the 4 cubits always acquire it, niknele arba amos today. Let him, just by being within the 4 cubits of it, he should have acquired it. So we see from here it doesn't acquire it. The Gemara says, no, and here what are we talking about? He didn't say that he wants to acquire it, and so therefore he didn't acquire it. The Gemara says, if the rabbis instituted this takana that wherever you are, you acquire it, why do we care if you say it or not? Given the nafel, once he falls down, he's showing through his actions that he intends to acquire it. So whereas Ba'arba Amos lo nichoi diniknei. So the Gemara says no. The Gemara says once he falls down, he's demonstrated that. So the Gemara says. So the Gemara's answer is that once he falls down, he's demonstrated that he wants to acquire this by falling on it. But with the Arba Amos, well, Nichole de Nikne. But within 4 Amos, he doesn't intend to acquire it. So that's the Gemara's answer, meaning to say that the 4 cubits, they're only acquiring him when he wants to do it. But when he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't acquire it. So by falling down on it, he showed that he didn't intend to acquire it by being within the 4 cubits. So it says the Gemara. Hold on 1 second. Says the Gemara, Papa gives a different answer. Papa Amar Kitakino Rabbanan Arba Amos Ba'alma. When the rabbis instituted that when you're within 4 cubits, you acquire something, that's just in general. But where everybody has the right to walk. But in this person's field, where the corner of the field was, they didn't institute it. And so therefore in somebody else's field, you actually have to pick it up. Even though the Torah tells you can acquire the corner of the field that the poor person can get it. The Torah allows you to get it, to go in there and to go and collect it. The Torah didn't give you the right as a courtyard, because that was an extra right that the Torah didn't give you. Amar Rava, Moshe Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi Nizikin. So Rava says, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi challenged this law about the 4 Amos from the laws of damages, from Maseches Nizikin, from what we learned in our Mishnah. It says, he says, if you see something on the ground and you fall on it, and somebody else comes along and grabs it, the one who grabs it has acquired it. Then if you say falling on, you could acquire for 4 Amos, you should have acquired it by falling on it. Gemara says, no, same answer. He didn't say, I want to acquire it. Gemara says, well, if the rabbis instituted, what do we care if he said it? Gemara explains, no, once he falls on it, he's demonstrated that he only wants to acquire it by falling on it, but not by being within the 4 cubits, and therefore he didn't acquire it. Whereas Rav Sheisha says, where do the rabbis institute that you could acquire something by being within 4 cubits of it? Besimta. If it was a place that a lot of people have access to, the Lodachki Rabbim, that it's a place that people have access to, but it's not the public domain. But the Kadaki Bay Rabbim, but the public domain, there are a lot of people walking there, crowded all over the place, a lot of traffic, foot traffic. Takino Rabban, the rabbis didn't institute this. Mar says, but didn't we say, Bekol Makom Kamar? It says wherever you are. Meaning to say, Kol Makom, no, when it says wherever you are, it comes to include those cases, those places that are next to the walls of the public domain. Typically, people don't pass there. So there the sages instituted, but not public domain itself. So now, once we taught a law that Reish Lakish taught in the name of Abba Kohen Bardula, we do another law. The similar law. Katana, a young girl, Ein law chotzer, that she does not have the law of chotzer, meaning to say courtyard, that if her husband threw a get into her courtyard, then the get will not be acquired and she's not divorced. It has to be given to her directly. The Ein law arba amos, and also if he throws it within her 4 cubits, she's not divorced. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, Mishum Rabbi Yanai, Amar yesh la chotzer yesh la arba amos. No, she has the law of a courtyard and she has the law of 4 cubits. But my kamiflagi, what's the nature of their argument? Marasavar chotzer mishum yada is Rabbi. Keechad isla yad. So Rabbi Yochanan is going to be in the position that the law of a courtyard, being able to acquire something, comes from the hand. That just like she has a hand and she couldn't receive a get or a divorce, so too she has a court. So too her courtyard works. But the position of Reish Lakish is in the name of Abba Bardula is that a courtyard is learned out from the law of agency, meaning she could that the courtyard is your agent. So just like the minor cannot appoint an agent, so she has no courtyard. So the Gemara says against Reish Lakish, is there anybody who says that the law of a courtyard is learned out from agency? But didn't we learn in the Brisa? It says if you find the stolen object in his hand, and that even if you find it, the stolen object in his roof, his courtyard, his garden, how do we know minayin? How do we know that you have to pay double? Tam Omer, himatzei timatzei mikol makom, wherever it is. If you're going to say that agency is the courtyard is learned that from agency, if that's the case, this is an example of there can be an agency for sin, but we have a principle that there can't be an agency for sin. So the Gemara says no, a fundamental distinction. Says Ravina, where do we say there's no agency for sin? That's only in a circumstance where the agent is obligated in the prohibition. That's only a circumstance where also the agent is obligated in this prohibition. But the courtyard is not; it has no obligations. So then so there can be an agency for sin because the courtyard has no obligations. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, how that if the person who you're pointing as your agent or the item that you're pointing the agent is not obligated, it could serve as your agent. Well, then what about the following circumstance? Isha, the Eved Suvaginvuli, a man says to a woman or a slave, go out and steal for me. And we already learned that that they don't have to pay. When you say that the one who sends them will be liable, Mar says, they know women and slaves are obligated; they're not allowed to steal. But the reason why we say that they don't have to pay is they just have no money to pay. That once they're divorced or the slave is free, they do have to pay. Or if someone gives a different answer, that's where we say there's no agency for sin. And that's in a circumstance where if the agent wants to, he could do it. If he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to do it. But the courtyard, the Baal Karcha, most of Mechayev Shocha, but the courtyard, there's no choice there. So of course he's going to be obligated. The one who sends it, it's obligated. My benayu, what's the distinction? Ika benayu kohen the Amar Leil Yisrael. The distinction between them is the kohen who says to a Jew, "Say v'kadesh li isho grusha." The distinction between them is where a kohen says to a Jew who's not a kohen, go out and betroth. The distinction between them is a kohen says to a Jew, go out and divorce for me this woman. Say v'kadesh, go out and marry me this woman who's divorced. So therefore, she's prohibited to the kohen, is allowed to the Jew. Or inami ish to amar lo isha, a man says to a woman, akfili katan, go and cut off the payos of this child. According to one who says, that if the one who's doing it has a discretion, then the one who sends him is not responsible. Hani nami, then also these, the Jew and the woman, the Yisrael and the woman, they don't have to do it. And the one who sends him is not responsible. But according to the one who says that the agent is not going to be responsible for, is that wherever the agent is not capable, that wherever the agent is not obligated, then the shochet is going to be responsible. Haninami, these cases also, keeping the lav b'nei chayuvi, since they're not obligated, mechayev shochet, the one who sends them is going to be responsible. So we'll stop here, and God willing, we'll review this on Shabbos Kodesh, and everyone should have an amazing